We all know the feeling when the car doesn't behave as we want it to. It's either sketchy as driving on ice or it understeers like a 2-ton cement rig. But no matter the case, it ruins our confidence and keeps us from reaching the full potential of the car. In this video, we'll be covering 5 simple setup tricks that can help you get closer to your potential and make the car behave more like you want it to. Let's jump into it. Getting the car balance right for your unique driving style can be quite tricky, but one of your best friends is the anti-roll bar. Changing this setting affects how the car behaves basically everywhere on track. It affects high speed, low speed, rotation, and it can even change how much traction you have on the exit of the corner. In most race cars, there will be an anti-roll bar located in the front and one at the back. And in faster, more high-tech race cars like the GT3s or the Indy cars, you can change the anti-roll bars while driving. The front ARB, surprisingly enough, adjusts how much grip you will have at the front. Softening the front ARB will give you a more pointy front end and better turn-in. So if you're struggling with getting the car turned in slower or tighter corners, softening the front ARB is definitely something you should try out. The same is said if you're struggling with oversteer, however then you just want to increase the front ARB instead of decreasing it. So a good rule of thumb here is the softer front ARB will give you more rotation and a stiffer front ARB will give you less rotation. Now changing the rear ARB is actually just the opposite of changing the front. Softening the rear ARB will make the rear end less responsive and giving you what should feel like a more understeery car. But this also means that stiffening up the rear ARB will give you more rotation. So as an example, if you're struggling with rotation in high speed corners, try increasing the rear ARB or decreasing the front ARB and see if that works out. Now that we've covered the first setup tip, I want to welcome you all back to another Overtake GG video. My name is Markus and you probably haven't seen my face on this channel before. That's because it's my first video here and I'm super excited to become a new regular face on the channel. I'm 20 years old, I've got around 9,000 iRating and I race for one of the biggest sim racing teams on the planet. So if you want to know more about me and how I go about my day and how I've gotten to where I am, head over and follow me on my channels. Now let me show you some more setup tips so you can become a better sim racer. Adjusting the wing angle is quite simple, but it's really important as getting it wrong could cost you some valuable lap time. Wing angle is adjusted mostly to find more straight line speed or to find more downforce. Logically enough, decreasing the wing angle will give you more straight line speed, but it'll also give you less rear end grip, which will make the car feel more on edge and more oversteery. Increasing it, on the other hand, will increase drag, which gives you less straight line speed, but it'll feel more settled and more stable throughout the corners. What the exact right wing angle is different from one track to another. But I think a good rule of thumb with the wing angle is run it as low as you can before the car starts getting sketchy or it starts feeling like it's undrivable. The best thing here is just to play around with it until you figure out what feels balanced. Now remember, with wing angle, actually running a lower wing angle will also have less drag, which also means less fuel usage. So if that's something you're struggling with, you might want to try that out. If you're at a high-speed track like Le Mans or Daytona, where running low wing angle is necessary and you're still finding that the car doesn't feel balanced, adjusting the ride heights is where you can make a big difference. This setting can be found in the chassis part of the setup, but normally you can't just click the ride height higher or lower. There's another setting you need to adjust. You will have to use the spring perch or the third perch offset to adjust the ride height. Now which one of them, it doesn't really matter. There's a reason it's called the offset. That's basically all it is. It's just to adjust the ride heights of the car. And you can see I basically play around with them a bit until I get my desired ride height, which on the front is as close to the minimum as possible. Optimally, it'll be flashing yellow and you'll be on the lowest ride height, and that's sort of what I aim to go for. Now if you're on example here 30.1 millimeters, you know, it's not gonna make the biggest difference. For most cars, running the lowest possible ride height on the front end and running a higher ride height on the rear end is the way to go. Now this will set the car up with a good amount of rake, which as you might know is really good, especially for downforce cars. What rake does is it increases the amount of downforce a car has by optimizing the airflow under the body of the car. However, you also want to make sure that you don't run too much ride height, as this will just diminish the effect. The best way of finding out the right balance is just by doing laps, and if the car suddenly oversteers or loses grip, you're probably running too much rake. Therefore, if that happens, decrease your ride heights on the rear end and you should feel it be more stable. So let's dive into some more complicated setup tips that will allow you to find the final bit of time. But before we do that, I hope you're finding this video useful, and if you are, make sure you subscribe to Overtake GG with bell notifications on so we can teach teach you more secrets of how to become a better sim racer. Next up, I want to talk about differentials. Now the differentials are tricky, but it can really make or break a good setup. You can typically find the differential in the final setup page before the notes, but sometimes it'll also be located in the chassis and the dampers. iRacing, I don't know why you can't just put it all on the same page in all cars. It will make it so much simpler, but sadly, that's not the way it is. Now, the settings you'll be looking for is called diff ramp angle, clutch friction plates, and preload. Now, what the differential does is it basically determines how locked the wheel axles are. Now, I'd recommend mainly sticking to changing the preload, as this is small and incremental changes. Now, more preload equals more lock on the axle, which equals more understeer off throttle and more oversteer on throttle. Now, the same is true the other way around. Less preload equals less understeer off throttle and less oversteer on throttle. If that didn't make sense, which is completely understandable, go back 20 or 30 seconds of the video and just watch it through again. I mean, even I just struggle to remember this at times. Anyways, let's say that you're finding that the car oversteers a bit too much and feels a bit too loose on throttle. Decreasing the lock on the differential can make a really positive difference on throttle. But just remember that that will also mean that you will have less understeer off throttle. I mean, I get why you would understand this is confusing, because it's certainly not the easiest thing, but I would really recommend that you try to understand it, because it can really make a big difference. Finally, let's talk about spring rates. If you're finding that the car oversteers or understeers, especially in high-speed corners, spring rates can be your best friend. It's a really simple setting to adjust, but it can really make a big difference. The spring rate is the amount of force needed to compress the spring, which is why in downforce cars and high-speed corners, you'll be able to feel it having a more significant difference because there will be more load pushed into the springs. It works similarly to the ARBs we talked about earlier. Increasing the spring rate either on the front or the back will make the car stiffen up and a bit more responsive. If you're finding that your car oversteers mainly in high speed corners, increasing the rear spring rate by a click or two could make a good difference. Just remember, it'll also make a difference in medium and low speed corners, but it'll be more significant in the high speed. Also remember to check that when you're changing the spring rates, it changes both the left and the right, because some cars you have to go in and change both the left and the right. You can have separate spring rates on each side. And on top of that, remember that it can also mess around with your ride height, so just make sure that after you've adjusted the spring rates that you readjust the ride heights as well to be back at what they were before. Now, I hope that wasn't too much information in one video. If you found it overwhelming, don't be afraid to go back and watch it through again, because there's a lot of useful stuff that you can use. There's a lot of useful information that you can learn off. Now, if you enjoyed it, make sure to check out my channel and subscribe to Overtake GG. I've been Markus, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.